In February 1933, the Oxford Union had a debate, and the motion was presented as follows: that this House will under no circumstances fight for its king and country. And these were the cream of British society, passing a resolution that they were not going to go to war. On December the 1st, 2024, the Oxford Union had a debate about Israel, and 75% of the participants voted that they would have chosen not to report Hamas plans to the authorities to prevent the October 7th massacre if they had been given forewarning of that attack. There's something very creepily similar in both of those resolutions, and I'm going to be talking about them after I've told you that I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. All right, back to 1933. Now, the sort of people who were in Oxford in 1933 would have been from the upper middle classes and the aristocrats of British society. Now, contrary to what a lot of people think, in the First World War, the highest proportion of men killed were from the upper and middle classes. They were the officers. They died at a much higher rate than the ordinary, the private soldiers, the non-commissioned officers, those sorts. A lot of people like to think that they sent their working class subordinates into a terrible danger and had them all killed and sat there, I don't know what, smoking cigars and drinking whiskey or something. No, the highest proportion of casualties, mortalities, were officers. Maybe not generals, but certainly the lower ranks of officers. And they would have all come from the upper classes, upper middle class and aristocracy. So the people who made this decision on the Oxford University debate in 1933 would have been the children of families, many of them fatherless families. You know, the people who'd grown up with pictures of their dead fathers, fathers who died when they were babies. So you can understand that they had a certain amount of antipathy towards war. But that decision, Winston Churchill remarked, was responsible in many ways for the Second World War, because the people who said that were from the ruling classes of British society. And when Hitler and his associates saw that the ruling classes were dead set against the war, then they thought they were going to have an easy time of it. They thought that the British wouldn't fight, that they could take, the Germans could just march into various European countries and the British wouldn't stand up against them. As it turns out, I think most of those young men who voted for that decision actually then were among the first to sign up and go to war. But that wasn't what they said there, and because of that, Hitler stopped worrying about Britain. It was also fashionable to be a pacifist. So some of those young men, and it was probably mostly young men, some of those young men would have sort of had the idea that, well, yeah, if Britain was in trouble, they really would go to war, but they didn't dare say that. I'm sure that would have been part of the decision as well. Peer pressure is quite important to people in their teens and early 20s. So there was a fashion at the time for being a pacifist. That was considered to be the sophisticated modern person that was bringing in the new century. So there were a couple of things going on. The first is it was fashionable to be a pacifist. The second is that some of them would actually have a family background that would encourage them to be pacifists. And this pacifism leaked through all of British society. So Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister, went for appeasement simply because he knew the country was behind him on the idea of not poking the German bear. And there's something creepily similar here, whereas it's not fashionable to be a pacifist, it's fashionable to be anti-Zionist. So I believe that according to this article here from the Free Speech Union, the hall was packed with people with Arabic names of various sorts. So one would assume that they would be more anti-Zionist than most. And it's quite possible that, well, it says here in this article that many Jewish students just felt intimidated into not going. But it wouldn't have only been Jewish students. It would have been non-Jewish students who weren't really on the side of the anti-Zionists, but didn't want to fly in the face of the narrative, so stayed away because it wasn't fashionable, just in the same way as it wasn't fashionable to be all for war in the 1930s. And something really quite awful happened. To actually say that you wouldn't warn anyone of the impending attack, even if you'd got the full information about it, that's pretty awful. And somebody else referred to the Hamas attack as an act of bravery or courage or something like that. Well, I don't consider it very courageous to rape teenage girls at a rave. And I don't consider it particularly brave or courageous to go into a kibbutz and start shooting old ladies in the retirement section. So no, it was not courageous. But apparently the people at the union there were not disagreeing with what was being said. And the interesting thing, the interesting thing was that the team who was arguing in opposition to the motion comprised here, according to the Jewish Chronicle, a very sharp barrister called Natasha Hausdorff and Mossab Hassan Youssef, who was in Hamas for a while, and an Arab-Israeli journalist called Yosef Haddad. There's a broadcaster called Jonathan Sacherdoti as well, an extremely articulate speaker. So you might say that the Israeli side had the very best of speakers. Hausdorff is a lawyer, Sacherdoti is a wordsmith, Mossab Hassan Youssef, a very passionate anti-Hamas speaker who knows exactly what's going on in Hamas and the sort of corruption and evil that it represents. And Yosef Haddad, who's a journalist, and they, even with that sort of quality, the Oxford Union voted against them. But if you notice the names of the people who are, let's see, who was, first of all, protesters outside the Union organised by Oxford Action for Palestine chanted anti-Israel slogans. That could be heard inside the chamber. And inside speaking for the motion, somebody called Miko Peled described, here, October 7th attacks as acts of terrorism. And one of the speakers, another speaker was called Mohammed El-Kurd, and that means he's Kurdish, or his family were Kurdish anyway. And the union president is somebody called Ebrahim Osman Mofawi, an Egyptian. And then there was somebody else called Abul Hawa. So you can see that the sort of people they had talking for the motion were, well, not from British Christian traditions, at any rate. And apparently the whole operation, the whole debate was marked by, well, what looks to me like a sort of atavism, a reversion to primitivity. Yosef Haddad, he was one of the speakers on the Israeli side, an Arab Israeli and a journalist, countered claims of apartheid, highlighting evidence of coexistence among Jews, Christians and Arabs in Israel. He was an IDF commander. You're unlikely to find, if there was an apartheid, then he wouldn't have been an IDF commander. Haddad noted that he'd both given orders to and been saved by Jewish comrades. However, he was later ejected from the chamber amid shouts from the crowd. So even a decent debate was obviously not on the cards there. They took one of the debaters and threw him out of the chamber. I don't know what the circumstances were, but I can't believe that they threw him out because he was physically threatening the other side. I can't believe that. All right, so that's what was going on. Yosef, I suppose that's Yosef Haddad, also posted on X, "Last night I asked the participants and pro-Palestine opponents during a debate at Oxford Union if they would have reported Hamas plans to authorities to prevent the October 7 massacre. 75% voted that they would have chosen not to report plans." The depressing thing to remember is that it's like a replay of the famous King and Country debate in the Oxford Union in 1933. It was obvious that the Nazis were taking charge of Germany and that they were very militant. And that was when the Oxford Union, seeing this, said, no, we're not going to get ourselves involved in a fight with those guys. And that was what encouraged them into the sort of action that they took, which resulted in the deaths of millions of people. Millions of Europeans died in that Second World War. And it might have been stopped if the Oxford Union had declared themselves to be absolutely gung-ho for not letting Germany take liberties. And it looks like history's repeating itself, doesn't it? And that's what really worries me. Sooner or later, the British will stand up against this. But as in the last case, it might be too late, or late enough so that there's a lot of bloodshed that wasn't necessary. And we have to always wonder where the Churchill is going to come from, because it was Churchill who finally brought Britain together on this threat. And I just wonder who the Churchill is now. You never know. It might be Tommy Robinson. That would be bleakly amusing, wouldn't it? Okay, till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.